Hi everyone, this is Paul here from the Magdalene Centre. Today I'm going to be talking about the Sun's transit through Cancer, which starts at the summer solstice on the 21st of June, or winter solstice if you live in the southern hemisphere, and it finishes on the 22nd of July when the Sun moves into its home sign of Leo. So I'll be outlining some of the key aspects that flavour this transit and giving an overall theme of what the Sun Cancer means for us, so we have a rough idea of what kind of lessons we can learn during this time. Before I do that though, I just want to clarify, as I always do, that the astrology doesn't control us in any way, shape or form. It merely outlines the kind of spiritual lessons available to be learning at any given point and the kind of collective feel of the energies around us. But it's up to us in terms of how we choose to respond to things, because the energy doesn't control us, it's just a set of influences. If we understand what kinds of themes are hinting at, we can then make more conscious use of the energies. Now with the Sun in Cancer, Cancer is all about our internal world. We've had the Sun in Gemini, which Gemini is a very outwardly focused sign. It's exploring the external environment and gathering information from it. Cancer is like a response to Gemini, so rather than all that mental activity of Gemini, it's turning inwards and connecting with our internal landscape and the world of our feelings, if you like, or our intuition. So it's going into the core of who we are rather than looking outwards, because a lot of the answers that we're seeking actually lie within us. But with Cancer, it's water, so Cancer is all about emotions, our feelings, and with it being a cardinal sign, it's a much more kind of active energy versus, say, the more subtle energies of Pisces or the more intense energies of Scorpio. Cancer is ruled by the moon, so the moon is obviously cyclical in nature, so it can be helpful to try and understand how, or use this period where the Sun is in Cancer to see or pay attention to our feelings as the moon makes its transit around the zodiac, and see how we respond at different times. But Cancer is also about our past conditioning, or rather the repository of all the emotional responses to different conditionings that we've had. But the emotions themselves don't come on their own, they're triggered by things. So a key part of Cancer, because it is a very past oriented sign, or looking back into the past, a key part of it is learning to separate ourselves from our pasts, so we're not living our pasts, as it were. What I mean by this is that, have you ever noticed that sometimes when something happens, we have an emotional response to it, but we're not actually responding to the current situation, we're responding to an old memory that evokes the situation evokes. So we're actually going down conditioned emotional responses here, which is driven by the ego, because the ego seeks patterns or seeks links to what's already been experienced, but usually our emotional responses as a result are inappropriate for the situation, or that they're out of proportion with what's actually happening. So a key part of Cancer is to learn to sit with our emotions and develop that emotional awareness. So it's important that we feel our emotions. However, it's also important that we're not carried away by them, so we're not flooded. So think of it like a river flowing smoothly. The river, like the emotions, are contained by the banks, so it's not creating chaos, but it doesn't have something obstructing it. So if we try to numb our emotions, that's like trying to dam the river so the water isn't flowing smoothly. When that dam eventually bursts, we then have a massive flood of water, which is like being overwhelmed by emotions. So it's learning to not suppress emotions, not bury them. It's about being in touch with them, but not being controlled by them. So it's being honest with ourselves about how we feel about something, but it's also maintaining awareness of context, so we're not swamped by emotions and not pulled into past thinking or dwelling on the past. So a key part of this is about separating egoic influence from our emotions, because our emotions are a barometer of how we're feeling, but it's important that we separate them from our past, and so this is about learning to ignore the promptings of our ego. So if we're having random thought patterns or dwelling on the past, and it's evoking emotions. It's becoming aware of this tendency and separating the thoughts from emotions, so that if the thought arises, it doesn't trigger an emotional response, then lowers us down into a bad mood of some kind. But cancer is also about nurturing, so it's how we nurture one another and love one another as such. But to do this first, we need to be able to love and nurture ourselves, and it's about knowing ourselves, knowing the core of who we are. So it's exploring the roots of our being, so spending that time in stillness and being present with our emotions in order to sink down into our roots and allow those roots to go down to that river of water at the core of our being that keeps us nourished. It's that flow of love at the core of who we are, but it requires us to become present, to slow down, and to move beyond thinking and go into our emotional self, and to explore the roots of who we are and learn to tap into that love. So it's creating a sense of rootedness within ourselves. So we're not ungrounded, we're not feeling rootless or disconnected from the world. It's learning to have that sense of belonging, but for that to happen, we have to be true to who we have to be real with ourselves, because otherwise, if we're trying to pretend to be something that we're not in order to gain belonging, it's not a true sense of belonging. Because cancer is about that sense of home, and home is where the heart is. We generally think of home, these as buildings, but really our true spiritual home, if you like, is within us. And if we're connected with that place, then we can feel at home just about anywhere. But if we're not connected with our core sense of self, and it doesn't matter where we are, we'll never feel completely secure, we'll never feel completely safe. So the trick of cancer is about getting in touch with the core sense of self, so we can learn to feel at home in the world. It doesn't mean that we identify ourselves as being of the world. It just means that we feel comfortable within it, so we learn to be in the world but not of it. And it's also about how we give and receive nurturing. So this could be, do we struggle to nurture other people, or conversely, do we over-nurture? Because cancer is the mother, but we do too much mothering and become smothering. So it's making sure that the way we love other people isn't going to create dependencies with that person. It's not going to overwhelm them with affection or a desire to try and nurture them without giving them the space to be themselves. So it's learning to understand how much nurturing we need to give to other people, so that we help them to meet their needs if they require that. We also respect the fact that they have their own needs, they have their own way of being, and it's not our job to mother everyone. Sometimes we've got to take a step back and allow people to make mistakes, as it were, so they can actually learn from it. Because otherwise, if we keep going in there and trying to rescue people before they've had a chance to learn the mistake from it, then it's not really nurturing. We're trying to protect them from themselves, and that's not helping the other person at all. Now, in terms of the aspects to the sun this month, we've got quite a few aspects. The first one actually starts quite soon in, so this will be around about the 23rd, and this is when we'll have both a sextile to Uranus and a square to Chiron. Because Chiron and Uranus are kind of in a lockstep at the moment, so they're always around about 30 degrees apart because of the position Chiron's in his currently in his orbit. You can't really get an aspect to one without an aspect to the other. So Uranus gives us an opportunity to explore or connect with our intuition, or to open our sense of identity up to a higher way of being. So it's moving beyond just the personal self and understanding that we're actually part of a collective whole, and it's about connecting with that higher vision that is about uniting people together rather than separating them as the ego does. But at the same time, we have that square to Chiron, so this is a time where we may feel the effects of how do we undermine our sense of self-identity through using negative I am statements. So it's important that we use this time to observe how the statements we say about ourselves make us feel, and if they bring us down, then we need to obviously change them so they elevate us. This is also a month where we have the opposition to Saturn, marking the midpoint of the Saturn retrograde. With oppositions, it tends to be if ideally we want to try and bring them or work on them within ourselves, more often than not, one end of them gets projected onto another person, and that person then acts out one end of the polarity, and we act to the other. And it's through this that we then try and learn from it. But more than not, this is an unconscious process. So it could be, in some cases, we may be playing the role of the person trying to assert their needs, explain their feelings, and the other person could be like Saturn being the stern parent that's setting boundaries, saying there's no good moping. If you want things to stop being this way, you're going to have to actually make changes. You can't just sit there dwelling on things. This opposition is also, it's about that balancing the subjectivity of Cancer with the objectivity of Capricorn. The two signs, whilst they're opposite one another, they complement one another. Cancer can prevent Capricorn from being cold, aloof and caring, whilst Capricorn serves to stop us from navel gazing, pulls us out of the self and reminds us that we have a responsibility to the world as well in terms of being the best versions of ourselves. It's looking outwards as well and not just navel gazing and dwelling on our own internal landscape without doing anything else. We'll have a full moon in Capricorn as well, so this is another opportunity to address this kind of balance. This is on the 28th, so this is a time for observing how do we balance the two. So how do we balance our sense of who we are or our feelings with the responsibilities we have to the outside world, but also do we maintain a sense of integrity to the self, so what we're doing externally is an accurate mirror of who we are internally. We'll also have later on a trine to Jupiter. It's around about the 5th of June. So this is the closing trine. The Sun's moving towards Jupiter now, so this will be just before the end of Jupiter's retrograde, but this often feels like when the Sun and Jupiter trine one another, you often get this sudden sense of optimism or sudden surge of energy just before the end of the retrograde. But it's important that we use this trine not to suddenly expand outwards into the world before we're ready. It's about using that trine to develop greater understanding. So it's connecting with our internal world, connecting with our emotions, and understanding what emotions do we need to let go of, and what conditioning from the past where we still have emotional charges deep in the subconscious, or we still have obsessive thought patterns that cause us to seek control over the environment because we're afraid of vulnerability. It's an opportunity for us to work on that. And around about the same time there'll be a trine forming to Neptune, which becomes exact on the 8th, but the three together form a grand water trine, so there'll be a lot of emotional energy available. With Neptune retrograde in Pisces, this gives us the opportunity to allow that psychic sensitivity to become a part of who we are. Because the thing is, we already have intuition, we already have psychic senses, but for different varying degrees, most of them are buried or suppressed because of the conditioning we've been through. So with Cancer, the Sun going through Cancer, giving us this opportunity to break free of old conditioning, especially conditioning from childhood or from a younger age, because Cancer generally deals with childhood and our family. If we can break free of certain patterns that we've kind of inherited from our past, then this gives us an opportunity to open ourselves up to these other gifts that we all have, but obviously requires that we take responsibility for them as well. So, and this only happens if we're true to who we are. It's not something that can be faked, it's something that can only happen if we're true to who we are. So by doing the work of Cancer, of exploring the roots of our being and expelling any conditioning from our past that stops us from or causes us to shrink away or shy away and withdraw into a shell, this is a kind of condition that we need to break free of, so we can then radiate love and nurturing unconditionally to the world around us. But obviously we have to create this on the inside first. So if we don't already know how to love and nurture the people, then the Sun in Cancer is a time for us to work on this. Bear in mind, we also have a solar eclipse in Cancer, which is the first one in Cancer for about 8 to 9 years. So this solar eclipse is the first one of a new cycle that will truly begin from November onwards, when the North Node moves into Cancer. But the solar eclipse in cancer, which I'll do another video on at a later date to go into more detail. This is about either we're the ones who serve to embody the ability to feel, or to ability to express our emotions or to feel our emotions properly. It's also about our ability to nurture one another. If this is something that we struggle with, then this eclipse will highlight this to us. So situations may arise as we respond to the energies around us, which highlight where we struggle to be nurturing to other people, or where we struggle to provide that kind of safe space for people to discharge their emotions. This doesn't, when I say this though, I need to emphasise that I'm not saying that we allow people to project their issues or that we allow people to use us as a dumping ground. No, what I'm saying is that we can create a nurturing environment if people need it, but it's important that we don't try and engage in any kind of people pleasing or do it to try and help people if they haven't asked for the help, because free will must always be respected at any given point, otherwise we'll create karma for ourselves. And around about the same time as the eclipse, the Sun will oppose Pluto retrograde in Capricorn, marking the midpoint of the Pluto retrograde. And this will be a time where we may feel that the opposition between the two. So here we could see either experience power plays with the people if it's not something that we've worked on within ourselves, or the people could be projecting shadow onto us. But either way, it's important that we don't take anything personally at this time, that we pay attention to the dynamic of the situation. So it's not seeing it from or taking things personally, it's taking that step back and observing the way the interaction goes, observe our internal responses to things, and try and understand where do we try and control other people because we think that power is something that's external to us, or where do other people try to control us because they're coming from a place of insecurity because they don't understand yet that true power lies within us. And this gives us this opportunity to observe how well have we understood our own personal shadow during this time, and how much are we still projecting our issues onto other people to avoid dealing with it, or use someone as a hook to mirror the issue to us so we can then try and battle it out that way. But at all times it's important that we take responsibility for ourselves and try and understand what is our contribution to the dynamic, and if we can identify it as something that we haven't dealt with within ourselves, then it's important that we take responsibility for it. So there's obviously other activity going on during this time, but this is mainly about a Sun's transit in Cancer. But I hope it brings you, this report brings you enough insight to work with it. Obviously the different aspects will go into more detail during the weekly reports, but if nothing else, if you take nothing else away from this, the most important thing is that we get present with our emotions and we take that inward journey. So we stop seeking answers outside ourselves all the time. We take that time for meditation or some kind of spiritual devotion, and that we take that inward journey through our emotions to try and understand where we still reacting to things from past conditioning, as opposed to responding things by being in the present moment. Because any kind of emotional reaction is usually generated by a similarity the mind is identified between the current situation and a past one. But for us to respond in the appropriate way rather than reacting automatically, we have to get real with ourselves and we have to understand our internal workings, to explore internal landscape and free our minds from emotional conditioning through renewing the mind and breaking the old egoic patterns or the old thought patterns that trigger emotional issues. So if we can work on ourselves by clearing out past conditioning, we get a clear idea of who we are, we empower ourselves to respond to situations rather than react. And as long as we stay connected with our emotions, we don't allow them to take control, we can be aware of how situations make us feel or how we feel about certain issues, but we don't allow them to control us in any way, shape or form. So we become detached from the drama, and we can be true to who we are but make sure that our emotions don't control us, because we understand that we are not our emotions, we're not our feelings, we're something greater than that. But the emotions and feelings are important because they help us understand how we're perceiving things or how we see things at the moment, and whether we still come from a place built on past conditioning, which is the ego, or do we come from a place of presence, which is the soul. So may the sun's transit through Cancer bring you many insights and greater emotional freedom through the shedding of old conditioning, and may also allow you to develop greater self-care and self-love, and the ability to nurture and connect with one's own dreams rather than going along the crowd, because it's only by knowing ourselves that we can try and work on manifesting our dreams, which is the job of the opposite sign, Capricorn. Capricorn manifests it, but it's Cancer that contains that dream that we need to stay connected with if we're actually going to do something that is aligned and allows us to be maintain integrity, because we're doing what is right for us rather than what other people want us to do. So may the sun's transit through Cancer bring you much insight into the workings of your own mind and your emotions, and may it bring you an opportunity to clear out your heart of any issues that still hold sway, and may you emerge at the other end with great emotional freedom and greater self-love and greater sense of belonging through being true to who we are, so that people can love us for who we really are rather than who we're pretending to be. And by doing this, that true sense of belonging that we all crave and is part of the need for human connection, we can create that, but only if we're true to who we are, and if we can connect with our emotions and honour our own emotions and honour the emotions of others. So take care and be blessed.